fun.
Did Megan do something bad?
But it's still a horror film.
That's terrifying.
Is it though? Is it really? Welcome back to my disembodied voice. Now, in terms of Megan, for me, it wasn't terrifying or scary. Not even remotely. Now, I love Blumhouse, but recently I can't help but feel a little Disneyfication coming into their films, which is turning them into more stylistic product rather than bona fide horror movies which leave their mark. Also, whilst I appreciate Megan's design and see the pop culture iconography of selling her the same way Chucky was sold to the masses in dolls and figures with recognisable costumes, the film's lack of horror irked me somewhat. Now, a good horror film should scare you. Much in the same way that a good comedy makes you laugh, a scary movie should leave you feeling unnerved and uncomfortable and slightly on edge when the credits roll. Now, it's hard to scare people en masse because horror is subjective, and what terrifies one person can be amusing to someone else. Take clowns, for example. I have a friend who goes to pieces at the mere sight of a clown and found the recent 2-part It movies an unbearable chore. Myself, on the other hand, thought that whilst part 1 was okay and part 2 was tedious, I also found it a chore, but a chore as in it was very boring, not scary, and didn't interest me at all. Like I said, subjectivity. Now, let's remove gore from the equation, as we cannot always quantify gore with being scary, as, whilst torture and blood are upsetting, it's often thrown in more for revulsion and effect, and it is often used for congruity of the genre and revulsion rather than specifically being there to scare someone. Also, there are plenty of movies which terrify people that don't have a drop of blood. Take the first 2 Conjuring movies, for example, or Insidious, or 1978's Halloween, or It Follows, or even Paranormal Activity. But there are movies which do use blood for aforementioned congruity and shock nature of the genre, and also to really wring some disgust out of the viewer. Now, take the lovely Mrs. Crow, for example. I could make her watch the most abhorrent gore and she wouldn't bat an eyelid, whilst some scenes in horror films, such as notorious ones from Martyrs and Audition, leave me truly disturbed. Now, I consider myself a connoisseur of horror films. After all, I watched Jaws at the age of 4 years old and then found every way I could since to watch things I wasn't allowed to. But whilst horror is based upon subjectivity, in terms of psychology, there are things that, whilst not 100% scary, for others, are recognisably bad, ominous, disturbing, or at the very least, good plot accelerators. There are also topics which are ripe for commentary, exploration and exploitation in terms of modern day fears, be it technology, viruses, strangers outside your house, or rising crime rates. Certain topics can be explored through movies. And in recent years, as AI creeps up on us and changes our world more and more, it makes sense that horror movies try and find that subjective angle and add entertainment to modern day concerns, as well as twisting them into something that makes us think, get frightened, and overall watch the film and just be amazed. Now, AI and robots and sentient tech is nothing new, be it HAL 9000 telling Dave he can't do that, Terminators travelling through time, humans being enslaved in a matrix, or even faulty androids going postal whilst aliens savage a crew. Science fiction has always been a welcome bedfellow of horror. But in 2023, Blumhouse released a savvy little horror movie that, whilst it disappointed me immensely, was entertaining. And of course, I'm talking about what we started the whole video essay with, Megan, or Mithrigan, to give it its meme name. Now, let's be clear, I don't think Mithrigan was trying to be overtly scary and marketed its cut version for a wide audience, but for today's video, I want to look at modern day fears, real world events which are being explored in movies, and then take the aforementioned Mithrigan and look at how we can use real psychology, situational aspects, and twist unsettling tones and modern day fears into something quite creepy. Right then, let's crack on. Mithrigan deals with 8-year-old Katie, who, after her parents are killed, is sent to live with her aunt Gemma, a roboticist at a high-tech company. Gemma is covertly using the company's resources to develop Mithrigan, Model 3 generative android. But to make a long story less long, after Mithrigan is shut down by the company, Gemma pairs it with Katie and a relationship blossoms through high-tech AI bonding and a lonely child finally having a friend, until Mithrigan goes wonky and starts killing anyone who upsets Katie. Now, AI robot things for children is nothing new. The recent Child's Play remake sensibly ditched copying the idea of a serial killer possessing a doll and went for faulty AI. And the recent Megan Fox film Subservience finds a lonely and struggling dad buying a housemaid sim, which, as all dads would do if their wife was in hospital for several months, looks like Megan Fox. And in both Child's Play and Subservience, the AI becomes sentient, goes a bit wonky, and, like Mithrigan, gets a little bit possessive and starts killing those that upset its paired master. However, Mithrigan is interesting because it's dealing with loneliness, attachment, addiction to tech, and it comes out just a few years after the whole world went into isolation during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, whatever you feel about COVID and the handling of the pandemic, and opinions are strong, the modern world experienced something completely new and lifestyle changed in lockdowns, isolation, remote working, and then children being cut off from their friends. In Mithrigan, Katie has lost both her parents and is living with an aunt who is a career woman and doesn't much care for kids and doesn't know how to bond with one. However, and this is where I first think Mithrigan misses an opportunity, I think making her an orphan removes connectivity from a mass audience of parents and also a mass audience of children who are always in a loving but flux relationship with said parents. Also, as the COVID pandemic changed children's psychology and affected people due to being cut off, it was a really good way to explore this and how children's relationships with parents and their friends can be altered. Now, children, especially going around Katie's age, are developmental creatures of pure id. According to Freud, the id, the ego, and the superego are the following. The id. The id is the primitive and instinctive component of personality. The id is a part of the unconscious that contains all the urges and impulses. The ego. The ego is the rational part of the psyche that mediates between the instinctual desires of the id and the moral constraints of the superego, operating primarily at the conscious level. The superego. The superego is the moral component of the psyche, representing internalized societal values and standards. It contrasts with the id's desires, guiding behavior towards moral righteousness and inducing guilt when standards aren't met. According to Freud, we all have to develop the ego and superego necessary to squash those primal, entirely selfish urges. Now, Katie is reaching the stage of moving from child to young adolescence. She's 8 years old, and by the age of 9 or 10, she may start menstruation, bra shopping, and leaving dolls behind as she discovers more age-appropriate things. So Katie is caught in this sort of dyad. She's still a child, but not a young child in her childish years. She's becoming a young adolescent slowly. However, she's still very much based around childhood, and as she's not got many friends and she's currently living with someone who she's not really bonding with, it's a lonely place for her. Anyway, let's get back to the doll. Mithrigan is a creature of pure AI-based id, but although she will apparently never harm Katie, AI will do what AI does as it learns to adapt to new systems and her living and breathing soulmate. However, Mithrigan will do this and naturally break her own barriers and rules in terms of acting out and bonding, as the concerns are with AI that it has no boundaries and it learns as it develops. So Katie is forming her own ego by the constraints of her parents, but her parents are killed, and this removes a huge amount of conflict. Now, I know it puts her in a vulnerable position and sets up her relationship with Gemma, who dislikes children, and it's ironic that Gemma makes toys for kids but has no idea how to bond with a child for herself. But for me, this is where the movie drops its biggest and massive potential. Children are behaviourally and emotionally purer at a young age, and that isn't to say they are just stupid or just misbehave, but their boundaries are set by their parents, and their interactions with the outside world form the conflict of influence over house set rules. In other words, they're always at odds with their parents despite always needing their parents. Cady is a mirror to Mithrigan's AI in the sense that Mithrigan and Cady will both learn and develop. Now, for Mithrigan, her parameters will also adjust and learn from those programmed in the lab, and as she learns, she will get more and more advanced. It's why Cady being with her parents could have been such a crucial plot device, because as Cady struggles because of the way she's being raised or just being very shy, the Mithrigan doll would learn from both parents and Cady and would start to groom Cady for herself and thus cause Mithrigan to start killing. We'll get onto that in a bit. Mithrigan could have been given for Cady by Aunt Gemma, as Cady's parents were worried about her not bonding at school or the fact she kept acting out, and Mithrigan could have been there to start regulating boundaries and helping with developmental milestones. But as time goes on, Mithrigan does the opposite and creates more problems. But then each time they try to take Mithrigan away, Cady's tantrums get worse, her behaviour gets worse, or Mithrigan turns herself on one night and wanders round the house and has illegal playdates with Cady whilst her parents sleep, and this creates the illusory world of happiness that a child is in danger or doesn't see real problems, much like Coraline's late night trips into the other world where she's slowly trapped and lured in by the other mother. Familiarity in horror is fundamental because we are scared by what we recognise being twisted and turned into something sinister. Horror is often about taking safety or something we don't like but have a concept of and twisting it into something which we know is dangerous, frightening, and threatening. Take the original Child's Play, which isn't really a scary movie but does deal with child loneliness and a single mother struggling to raise her demanding child. As Andy is given the Chucky doll by a mom who has saved up her money and just wants her son to be happy and have the latest toys that other kids have, we create this dynamic of conflict and isolation. It's a familiar scenario and also a great setup for putting the child in severe danger. However, upon receiving his good guy doll, this one is possessed by the serial killer Charles Lee Ray and needs to transfer his soul to a new body. During the movie, Andy is heard conversing with what his mother thinks is the doll, and Andy is just pretending to have a conversation with it like all kids do, when in reality the doll is grooming Andy into helping him get his revenge and also preparing him for the soul transfer. As a parent myself, I have heard my young child talking to their toys, and it's both creepy and ominous as we are ahead of the game in terms of Andy's mother. We know it's the doll, and the situation of hearing a child talk to his toys is very familiar, but it takes on a very macabre tone as we hear Andy wittering away, knowing that actually he's being groomed here and he's in danger. Now, Cady is too old for a good guy's doll, and therefore Mithrigan is more age appropriate, but it doesn't affect how the AI could have been learning by having a secret world and developing with a young girl who, at the end of her formative years of development, is now figuring out her own personality and identity. Children aged 8 to 13 are vulnerable due to massive brain changes. The main change is that unused connections in the thinking and processing part of your child's brain, called the grey matter, are pruned away. At the same time, other connections in the brain, the white matter, are strengthened. This is the brain's way of becoming more efficient, based on the use it or lose it principle. This pruning process begins in the back of the brain. The front part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, is remodelled last. The prefrontal cortex is the decision-making part of the brain. It's responsible for your child's ability to plan and think about the consequences of actions, solve problems, and control impulses. Changes in this part of the brain continue into early adulthood. Now, because the prefrontal cortex is still developing, preteens and teenagers might rely on a part of the brain called the amygdala to make decisions and solve problems more than adults do. The amygdala is associated with emotions, impulses, aggression, fear, and instinctive behaviour. Now, I've talked about the amygdala before and how it's part of the emotive lizard part of our brain. Tapping emotivity is always dangerous as it removes logic and shuts down the frontal part of the frontal lobe's reasoning and thinking. During the COVID-19 pandemic, there were concerns that too long on screens and too long in isolation was having detrimental effects on children developing brains, and, mirrored in the scene where Mithrigan is taken away, Katie has a tantrum as she wants her electronic device back. Parents' biggest worries revolve around their child, and Mithrigan misses this by not having them as the main protagonists. Watching their daughter isolate herself, misbehave, or gets bullied only adds to the trauma and worry, and as the AI sees this and adapts, and the parents see the changes in their daughter going from bad to worse, it could have created a truly ominous mood throughout the film. Mithrigan is already using Mithrigan herself as a metaphor for screen time and spending too much away from real children, and the movie, whilst meant to be absurd and unrealistic, mirrors how today's children are missing out on developing key social cues. And I think spending more time in school, or a world where parents are slowly shut out of said world by manipulative Mithrigan, would have been a truly great source of conflict and tension. Attachment theory is about secure attachments versus insecure attachments, and Mithrigan is really an unsecure attachment, and that's where the horror lies. There is no long-term relationship here to be had with the AI because the AI won't grow like Katie will. Also, it mirrors and learns, but it has no real identity outside of what Katie wants and will always revert to being an AI no matter how good its programming. In other words, it will learn and advance, but it won't grow and develop the same way that Katie's brain will grow and develop. Now, Blumhouse's thing is in its very name. It's all about the house. And that's because Blumhouse movies are more than often about domestic living homes and the horrors which are in the home rather than the home being a place of safety. So, in our creepy Mithrigan movie, it's a shame that we are detached from this by removing Katie's parents and also spending long periods in a corporate toy headquarters where we're supposed to see Gemma's life and why she's unable to bond with Katie. It's a massive misstep in terms of horror as, when we come to the inevitable Mithrigan killing spree, we lose familiarity. Now, familiarity is important in horror because our brains think very much in sequences, metaphors, images, and assumptions which are habitual and familiar. And that's why great horror movies take those conventions and add the macabre, occult, AI, or monsters to make the familiar much more scary. Now, we aren't in Katie's house with exasperated or abusive or uncaring parents or even devoted parents, and the film misses these tenets of familiarity. Katie may have issues with a boy at a party, which ends up with the ear-ripping scene and eventual running over of said unpleasant boy, but there is more horror in Katie making progress, making friends, and having those friends killed by Mithrigan, who either thinks she's helping them or is forming some kind of AI jealousy and thus adding to the heartbreak, conflict, and fear for genuinely nice characters. Making a bully in a horror movie is like shooting fish in a barrel. They're rude, they upset the protagonists, they're usually stronger, and when their death occurs, we are simpatico in wanting them to get their comeuppance. We lose affinity and horror, and we have a vicarious desire to see this person get their comeuppance, even though they're a child, because we're painted that way towards that decision. We're moved towards it by showing them being absolutely horrible, and whilst the running over might be a little bit upsetting, the ear ripping is all part of the, well, that's what you get when you mess with someone who's going to upset Mithrigan. However, if we were to have likeable people being killed, Mithrigan becomes the enemy who needs to be stopped, rather than a main viewing point which is being lined up for pop culture status alongside the likes of Chucky, Freddy Krueger, or Jason Voorhees. Mithrigan could have been a genuinely creepy film about a family struggling with their daughter and the problems that Mithrigan grooming her, causing chaos, causing accidents, and the refusal of a child to let go of their screen time relationship with Mithrigan would have created. The idea of a free-thinking AI evolving inside something your child has a relationship with could be genuinely unsettling, but as Mithrigan is set in the commercial world with comedic characters, lots of glossy lights, and missing the claustrophobia of suburbia and the tension between parents, daughter, and a malignant presence growing exponentially, the film veers far too away from horror and becomes something altogether different. However, I still quite like Mithrigan, and I'm not here to tear it down. It's an okay movie, but it's a shame it couldn't have been more, and as AI advances and toys get more advanced, the next generation of kids are going to grow up with more screens, and we are heading towards things like Mithrigan actually happening. And I wonder what horror will do next with its true Pandora's box of nightmare, which is waiting to be exploited. AI is a wonderful thing to get into now because it's going to be so relevant to all of us. And like I said at the start, horror is subjective, and going back to films like The Hallow, as I'm now a parent, things that wouldn't have scared me in the past with children scare me more because I have a child, and my familiarity of things like kidnap or harm coming to a child creates a much stronger response in my brain. But that's the joy of horror. You can't please everyone, and as Mithrigan was written as a commercial movie, which was intended to make lots of money, the version we got was more teen-friendly and disposable enjoyment, but for me, it was ultimately disappointing in terms of its potential.
Shut up, Meg.
Anyway, that's it for this week's video, so remember that psychology is cool. Please like, share and subscribe, as more subs means more vids, and as ever, leave a comment or start a discussion, as healthy debate is always good on here, and as ever, until next time, I'll catch you later.
Shut up, Meg.